Welcome everybody to the F4 Hunger Awareness Show.
It's my goal to feed 1 billion people before I die.
We want to bring awareness around the issue of hunger and food insecurity.
7 to 8 million people served so far, with the sole goal of eradicating world hunger by connecting sources of food to recipients in need. Fiorenza's Food for Friends.
Hi, it's Derek Fiorenza here with the F4 Hunger Awareness Show, joined by my dear friend Joseph Giandonato, PhD, C, MBA, MS, CS. Joe, you got so many initials here, brother. Health, wellness, and fitness research and educator. Brilliant man, absolutely has a heart of gold, knows his stuff inside and out, and what we're hoping to do, in addition to raising awareness for hunger and food insecurity, are provide useful tips to understand the science behind exercise and healthy living. So, Joe, we're looking forward to your presentation today, and take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Derek. Thank you so much, for having me and availing a platform where I can share, evidence-based information to your audience as well as all of those that you serve. And, I'm someone that is, committed to serving as an educator. And really that's been the impetus for, my dissertation research, which sought to explore an association between non-traditionally aged students, undergraduate students, and academic performance as well as physical activity. So there's going to be a publication in the coming weeks centered around my dissertation research. So very excited about that. But today we're going to be discussing getting the most from your GLP-1 with diet and exercise. GLP-1s have really kind of stolen the show over the past 4 or 5 years. We're going to dive into the data, and then we're also going to learn about how we can optimize GLP-1s with proper dieting as well as physical activity, or moreover, structured physical activity, which is exercise. So the itinerary today, covering the background as well as the utilization, why GLP-1s are deployed, also covering type 2 diabetes and obesity, which are the two primary reasons why GLPs have been prescribed. More recently, they've been prescribed for cosmetic weight loss for individuals that may not be clinically obese, but otherwise overweight by BMI standards, which in my opinion is a little maligned, especially if you have someone who is metabolically healthy. We'll discuss that shortly, as well as relevant findings as it pertains to physical activity, as well as dietary patterns that can support GLP-1s, but also broadly improve health for individuals that are not utilizing, GLP-1s. And then we will conclude following, some questions or a brief discussion. So GLP-1s, known as glucagon-like peptide 1 receptor agonist. So they mimic, the incretin effects of naturally occurring GLP-1, and they also stimulate insulin secretion and inhibit glucagon emission. So glucagon is a peptide hormone that is secreted by the alpha cells within the pancreas, and it's typically secreted a few hours following your last feeding or meal. And it converts glycogen stores within the muscle as well as the liver to glucose for usable energy. And why that is important is because GLP-1s will help stabilize your blood sugar levels or blood glucose levels, and they will, block, glucagon from tapping into those glycogen stores. So they're always going to be replete, and that is actually going to be beneficial for a number of things, particularly, physical activity. So you're not going to have to worry about, your blood glucose levels, shooting up post meal and then, hitting a lull to the point where you need to now mobilize, glycogen. Now, GLP-1s, they influence glucose metabolism throughout the body, pancreatic and also liver cells, the brain, and also skeletal muscle. And this is vitally important, especially as we look at the brain. So neurocognition is something that is vitally important across the lifespan. So the brain, utilizes anywhere from 110 to 140 grams of glucose a day. So it thrives, it needs, glucose. And that represents 20 to 25% of glucose use throughout the day in the human body. So that is a lot of glucose that the brain is utilizing, and GLP-1s can now optimize that. So it can improve neurocognition. It can improve energy levels because it's stabilizing blood glucose levels, and also it impacts appetite. And one of the reasons that it impacts appetite is that, well, of course, it inhibits the emission of glucagon, and also does trigger insulin secretion, and that lowers blood glucose levels, but it really stabilizes them to an extent. But how it impacts hunger, or how it impacts appetite rather, is that it reduces gastric emptying, number one, and that contributes to fullness or satiation. And over the course of time, it's going to reduce appetite. And deployment of GLP-1s have been shown to reduce appetite by 16 to 39%. And that's resulting in a reduction of body weight between 5 and 18% among clinical studies. Now, GLP-1s have also been shown to reduce glycosylated hemoglobin, A1C levels, as well as reducing all-cause mortality among individuals with type 2 diabetes, which is one of the reasons that they, are or originally were deployed. Now, cessation has been linked to weight gains. We'll touch on that shortly. And it has been used as a second-line treatment of type 2 diabetes for individuals that really didn't tolerate drugs that were aimed at improving insulin sensitivity, such as metformin, etc. So originally, these were, availed to individuals with metabolic disease, specifically type 2 diabetes. So prescriptions have increased a whopping 587% over the last 5 calendar years. Now, between last December and this March, the prescriptions have continued to increase 13%. And increased prescriptions have been observed among population segments, which include adolescents, young adults, type 2 diabetics, as well as bariatric patients. And that has actually caused some shortages for individuals that actually need it, and aren't just looking for cosmetic weight loss, so to speak. And again, by no means am I marginalizing, or am I criticizing their value, because they have immense clinical value. But we want to make sure that our intentions are clear. We also want to make sure that we address health behaviors from the outset, and we'll talk about that shortly. So they have been prescribed as a second-line treatment for individuals with type 2 diabetes. And type 2 diabetes is characterized as a relative insulin deficiency, also known as insulin resistance. So your body's producing a lot of insulin. And it is producing a lot of insulin because you are consuming foods that have maybe a higher glycemic index, and they evoke a greater insulinic response. So your body's producing more and more insulin, but your body becomes kind of desensitized or immune to it, for a lack of better term, so to speak. And, now your body's producing more and more insulin, and your body is not responding. And now it is, storing all of those carbohydrates, perhaps not in muscle, but perhaps in adipocytes. So, type 2 diabetes can lead to, increased fat mass. Now, type 2 diabetes accounts for 90% of diabetes mellitus diagnoses. The other 10%, is juvenile diabetes or type 1 diabetes. So globally, 530 million people suffer from, and we're looking at, close to 500 million, suffer from type 2 diabetes. And I wouldn't necessarily say that it is a pandemic, but it is rather an epidemic, particularly within industrialized nations, particularly the United States. Now, diagnosis usually later in life, and it's known as adult onset diabetes, and it's attributable to dietary pattern factors. So when we are consuming, too many carbohydrates, particularly simple sugars, particularly processed foods, which contain a lot of, sugars, as well as sedentarism or, a sedentary lifestyle in which individuals are sitting or reclining, or, relaxing. Maybe they are more screen oriented than activity oriented. And then also obesity can perpetuate, type 2 diabetes risk. So obesity affects nutrient metabolism, lymphocyte function, adipose tissue physiology, and also can inhibit insulin sensitivity, particularly of multiple organs. Now, the total cost of diagnosed diabetes in 2017, this was the most recent data that I saw, was $327 billion in the United States, with $237 billion earmarked for direct medical costs, the other $90 billion associated with lost productivity, as it relates to maybe absenteeism or as it relates to reduced work performance. Now, the annual medical costs associated with an individual who has diabetes is close to $10,000 a year. And this data is from, 4 or 5 years ago, before, stagflation, before, the surge of inflation that we've had over the past, 4 or 5 years. So I would imagine that it's probably closer to $13,000 or $14,000 now. And diagnoses rates are not slowing down as they're made. A new one is made every 21 seconds. So obesity, uh, as we well know, clinically is defined as a body mass index of 30 kilograms, per meter square or higher. One thing that I do want to point out.
We lost the audio, Joe.
You know?
Yeah, there you go. Back up a little bit,
Yeah.
backtrack that. You start
Okay.
with the 30 kilograms for the
Sure,
obesity.
sure thing. So, body mass index of 30 kilograms per meter square or higher would be considered obesity. Okay, and that right there does not take into account an individual's body composition, nor does it take into account an individual's activity capacity. So, here we want to promote an active lifestyle, irrespective of an individual's body composition. And then also too, we need to, be cognizant that if we are going to focus on losing weight, and as we've seen in, some of those clinical studies where weight loss associated with GLP-1s ranges from 5 to 18%, we need to consider what weight is being lost. If it's lean body mass that's being lost, if it's muscle, if it's bone that's being, lost because we're not loading, the bone, then that is something that is concerning. And not many studies have really focused on nor differentiated between fat mass as well as fat-free mass, differences. So obesity's causes are multifactorial. They're associated with genetics. Also, they're socioeconomic underpinnings as well as cultural influences. Now, the genetic factors account for just 25% of transmissible variance for fat mass, body fat percentage, and body fat distribution patterns, whereas social environmental factors account for 30%. So, nurture, may be a little bit more impactful than nature, but all of those things need to be considered. Obesity isn't just, we're not going to chalk this up to laziness, or we're not going to chalk this up to genetics. A lot of people, they might make excuses, or they might, cherry pick, or, maybe pigeonhole themselves to one cause or another. But we have to look at the totality of all of these different determinants of obesity. So obesity is correlated with blood pressure, serum triglyceride levels, and blood glucose levels, which have been shown to be irrespective of an individual's body composition or their activity capacity. But again, we need to make sure that we are active. We need to make sure that we are retaining a significant amount of lean body mass, especially if we are going to be active. Excuse me. So continuing on, obesity, has continued to rise. through 2016 and 2017, where it actually approached 40% of the U.S. population. However, it has begun to fall back down in the past years. A lot of that, could be attributable to, activity trends associated with COVID. In addition to that, too, having tech savvy younger generations, Gen Z, and maybe some older, Gen Alpha, that are getting a little bit more active and utilizing, nanotechnology, which is, vitally important. We see a lot more, niche, fitness trends also. And it is encouraging that it is beginning to drop, and it also could potentially be perpetuated, by pharmacological interventions such as GLP-1s. And again, they do have some value, but they shouldn't necessarily be used as a cheat code, so to speak. So relevant findings as it relates to diet or as it relates to dietary pattern. Now, this is vitally important, especially if we are going to be in a state of caloric restriction. As we well know, individuals that are deploying GLP-1s, their caloric restriction ranges anywhere from 16 to 39%. But I think 39% may be too drastic unless they're a bariatric patient and they have some ambulatory issues. So a study of 207 adults, we look at the mean age of 54, standard deviation would be 10.7 years, undergoing caloric restriction for a period of 6 months. We're split into high and low protein groups. This revealed that the lower protein intake resulted in a greater decrease in lean body mass in comparison to higher protein intake over the course of 6 months. The study also showed that dietary quality is closely related to weight loss, as a combination of higher fiber, increased fruit and vegetable intake, and moderated portion size can eventuate in better health outcomes, improve dietary quality, and also increase protein intake, which are imperative in periods of caloric intake suppression. So I've been a personal trainer for a number of years. I've worked as a strength and conditioning coach. I've had some high-level athletes that were trying to improve their metabolic health or improve their body composition, needed to lose weight. In those instances, or in all of those scenarios, rather, we focused on increasing their protein intake to match their activity level and also to make sure that they're preserving lean body mass. Now, let's take a look at resistance training, because resistance training is vitally important. And resistance training is, in my opinion, but not just in my opinion, but also, in the literature, and there's, streams of empirical evidence to suggest this, is a non-negotiable, because it can improve so many facets of your life and also can improve an individual's life expectancy or increase that. There are a lot of associations with, toe and foot strength and grip strength and, walking speed. And all of these can be improved by incorporating some resistance training, but I digress. So among caloric restricted individuals, resistance training can accelerate fat loss and improve body composition. A study of type 2 diabetic patients, there were 82 in the sample, aged 58, standard deviation roughly about 10, undergoing caloric restriction for a period of 10 weeks. Were split into 4 groups: a control, a diet group with exercise frequency of 3 times per week, and one with an exercise frequency at 6 times per week. The one group that was split into 6 times per week, they revealed the greatest preservation of lean body mass and fat mass losses among the higher frequency group who exercise 6 times per week. So very important that we are incorporating resistance training. It doesn't necessarily have to be 6 days per week, but we'll talk about some of the recommendations as we move forward. So to conclude, increase protein intake to defray losses of skeletal muscle mass during periods of caloric restriction, whether it is facilitated by a GLP-1, or it is something that is done intentionally through the diet, or there's some sort of dietary pattern change. Sufficient protein intake will facilitate recovery and also improve body composition. In addition to that, too, protein intake, has been shown to temper blood glucose levels and also, you know, modulate satiation. So there's going to be a sensation of fullness or satisfaction, so to speak. Daily protein intake recommended for individuals who are active 1.3 grams to 1 kilogram of body weight. Ideally, it's going to be higher for individuals that are engaging in intense resistance training or they're engaging in concurrent training, which is aerobic exercise, resistance training simultaneously. We also make sure that we incorporate resistance training to support fat loss, improve body composition, and enhance physiological functioning and work capacity. These behaviors must be established during and ideally prior to the cessation of the GLP-1 receptor agonist. We also want to make sure that we consult our primary care provider or healthcare professional with questions related to GLP-1s and also prior to beginning an exercise program.
Amazing as always, Joe. So I wrote down a
Thank you,
few
Derek. Appreciate it. I'm glad that I was able to share some good information.
questions, but can you just explain what happens when we eat and what does the insulin do? And then why do they say afterward you should go for a walk? Does that make
Well,
sense?
one there's yeah, sure thing. So, insulin is a partitioning hormone. So it's really a storage hormone more than anything else. And insulin is a peptide hormone, meaning that it's, chained together with a bunch of amino acids that have, transcriptive capacities or messenger functions, within the body. They interact with, different cells. So, the insulin is going to be secreted from the inner islets of the Langerhans gland, the pancreas, following a feeding or following a meal. Now, we have something that is known as a glycemic index. So the glycemic index rates the insulin response or the insulinic effect of different foods. Obviously, foods that are processed, or look at white bread, white rice, potatoes, ripe bananas. They're going to evoke a greater insulinic effect because they're going to spike blood glucose levels. And now with the blood glucose, the insulin is going to have to figure out a way. Hey, what do we do with this? So, if we're not active, are we going to top off, the muscle glycogen stores that are already replete? So where is this going to go? So, initially, you might have really high blood glucose levels. So you're going to have, boundless energy. But if you're not doing anything that involves or entails, physical activity, that energy is going to quickly plummet. And, the excess, carbohydrates will essentially be stored as fat. Now, when we look at, maybe going for a walk or engaging in some light activity following a meal, that's beneficial for a number of reasons. So activity is going to support digestive functioning. In addition to that, too, if you have maybe a higher carbohydrate meal, and we don't want to walk it off, like say, hey, out of guilt, because exercise bulimia is a very real thing. But it's going to help prevent bloating. It's going to help prevent gastrointestinal distress, because now you are expediting gastric transit time. So if you are active, if you go on a walk, if you go on a run, following a meal, perhaps not a very large meal, it will result in the need to evacuate bowels, down the line.
So do we want to keep our insulin levels low? Is that the goal?
Ideally, we don't want to produce too much insulin endogenously, because if we do that, now all of these cells within the body become, immune to or desensitized, or rather insensitive to the insulin that is being secreted. Because if you have, if you're consuming a high carbohydrate diet, and particularly you're consuming a lot of, simple sugars, and we're consuming, just say, a lot of lot of sports drinks or a lot of soft drinks that contain high fructose corn syrup, candy, cereals. What that's going to do is that's going to cause your pancreas to secrete a lot of insulin, an
Mm.
excessive amount of insulin, and over the long haul, especially if you're not active, um, and there might be some genetic underpinnings, you're going to be at greater risk of developing, metabolic syndrome or, type 2 diabetes, as a result. So ideally, we want to make sure that we are in a state of insulin sensitivity. So we are physically active. We have more lean body mass. In addition to that, too, we want to make sure that, our blood glucose levels remain stable. So that's not going to evoke, a significant, insulinic response. Just say if we consume a lot of carbohydrates at once, just say we're eating one or two meals a day, our blood sugar spikes, it, comes back down. And insulin production has been linked to aging.
Ah, so that's where fasting can help.
Certainly, that can definitely improve insulin sensitivity. Yes.
So with this GLP-1, uh,
Mhm.
I was writing some stuff down. It looks like every 20 to 21 seconds you said someone is being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes.
Yes, that's correct.
And that's almost, if I read that right, 530 million. That's close to 6, 7% of the world's population.
Yes.
So,
And most of them live in industrialized, countries, North America. We look at, Western Europe, but a lot are going to be, centered in the United States.
maybe you can finish up with you were saying that getting access to the drugs that are needed is becoming harder. Why is that again?
Well, there have been some shortages that have been reported, throughout the world, because a lot of people are deploying, GLP-1s, which cover Ozempic and Wegovy and Rybelsus, just to name, some drug names. I don't have any attachment to any of those. I'm just elucidating, some of the names that they're known by. And what that's doing is that's preventing folks that may be morbidly obese and non-ambulatory, may have metabolic syndrome or diabetes, or non-alcoholic fatty liver syndrome or other conditions where they need to lose weight, and they also need to improve their insulin sensitivity, and they can't get those drugs. And there have been some shortages that have been reported within the past few years.
So the takeaway is to maintain an active lifestyle, right? And focus on those proteins, it's not as many with the carbs.
For sure. And again, we need to make sure that our nutritional intake or our dietary pattern matches or is congruent with our lifestyle. So, for instance, if we're not athletes or we're not highly active, there is no need to consume, 6, 7 to 10 grams of carbohydrates per kilogram of body weight a day. We can, definitely titrate that down to something that is going to be, number one, more sustainable, and number two is going to, suit, our lifestyle, a little bit better, be a little bit more appropriate. So we need to make sure that we're cognizant of those things. And by no means is this intended to be critical of GLP-1s or individuals that may be using them, or providers that are prescribing them, because they have immense clinical applications, and they've helped millions and millions of people. However, if we have someone that may have a higher BMI, or they're looking to lose 5 or 10 pounds or potentially more, there are other ways that could be accomplished without pharmacological intervention. Another thing too is that the deployment of GLP-1s may perpetuate an epidemic of sarcopenic obesity. What I mean by that is you might have people that have a overweight or a normal BMI, but they've they've really reduced their lean body mass because they haven't been physically active. So, physical activity, specifically resistance training, is non-negotiable for the entire population.
Well, Joe, this was extremely helpful. We'll get this updated and uploaded pretty soon to YouTube and all the social media channels. But as always, we appreciate you being a guest on the F4 Hunger Awareness Show. Thank you, Joe.
Eric, I appreciate you, your support over the years and your friendship, and I appreciate, just having the opportunity to have this platform and being able to educate and impact the lives of others. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joe.